Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name is James, and today we're going to talk about Jupiter. So if you've been listening along as I've been releasing these, I obviously skipped a week for the holidays. I also busted up my foot, sprained my ankle pretty bad, so kind of been out of commission, so it's been a little harder for me to record, which is why we skipped the week. And obviously family and stuff in town. But we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to look at Jupiter today and get a sense for what it means, what it's about, and go from there. So as we have done, we want to look at the astronomy first to get a sense for what it is we can see about the planet, what it makes sense. So the very first thing is Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system, right? So it's going to have a large quality to it. We saw with Mercury being the smallest, it represents kind of small things, details, which means Jupiter is going to have this kind of larger, bigger, broader picture that it kind of represents. The second thing is Jupiter is the first planet on the other side of the asteroid belt, which means it's kind of the first planet in the beyond, really. Right? Mars, we know, I've classified as an outer planet. It's beyond the Earth, which means it's beyond the moon. It's beyond the self, right? And it kind of is that thing that's projecting the self outward into the broader scope of the world. But now Jupiter is kind of that broader scope. So Jupiter is going to be representative of things kind of beyond the self in a lot of ways. And we'll come back to that. And that also has to do with something we'd call the social planets. That is Jupiter and Saturn. They were called this in traditional astrology because a lot of their significations dealt with more societal things rather than personal things. That's not to say we don't get personal qualities from society, but they kind of go hand in hand, which is, so we'll discuss that in a moment. Jupiter is also a gas giant. It's one of the several gas giants. You've got Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all giant balls of gas. The ancients, I don't think, had any way of knowing this, but one of the qualities that we can actually kind of see is, as I mentioned, it's a social planet dealing with society. That means it deals with communication, intellect, right? That's what the air represents in astrology. And so you have the gas giants kind of dealing with those themes a little bit. Jupiter is also much slower than Mars, right? Mars, we looked at, had a very quick orbit around the zodiac, orbit around the sun relative to the other outer planets. Now Jupiter is the first one that is definitively slower. Jupiter has about a 12-year cycle, so you get about a year per sign. It actually is kind of fluctuates. Some of them are slightly longer, some are slightly shorter. But generally speaking, it's about 1 year per sign. And it's obviously not calendar year, it's just kind of dependent on where it's at in the cycle. For example, Jupiter's currently in Cancer, it's going to move into Leo sometime in the summer. So Jupiter has a bit of a longer cycle, which means it's going to have effects, it's going to have things that tend to take longer to play out. It also means it's retrograde cycle, and pretty much every planet from this point forward will have a retrograde cycle that is once per year as the sun moves away from it in the zodiac. The last thing is Jupiter is a very bright and vibrant star. It's not as bright as Venus, but it is extremely bright and shiny, and it's noticeable. Unlike Venus, right, it's not attached to wherever the sun is in the chart. And so Jupiter can actually be seen for a good chunk of the year, whereas Venus, you kind of have to, right, see it kind of in the morning or the evenings right before, right after sunset, and that's pretty much it. With Jupiter, you have this ability to see it for pretty much the whole night, which is why it was called the Greater Benefic. I mentioned in an earlier episode that the benefic stars or benefic planets all have this kind of very star-like quality. They look like very bright, vibrant stars. And so Jupiter embodies this. That means it's going to have a softer quality to it. So when we put all this together, what do we get? Well, if we think of what Mars is doing, it's projecting out into the wider world. Jupiter is going to be the response to that. It's kind of what we get from the broader world. And it's going to have a big kind of expansive quality to it as well. as well as a softness. And so what is this going to represent? It's going to represent at its core positivity, right? Addition. Because when you go out to get the things that you need, to get the things that you want, what do you naturally do? You increase the resources that you have. In addition, you see and learn things you didn't know before. There's an addition not only to your physical abundance, but to your mental, psychological abundance as well. In addition, you go out and you interact with other people. When you interact with other people, what are we doing? We're learning new cultures, learning new things, learning new ways of being, how people operate. And so Jupiter at its core is going to represent this kind of additive quality, but it's also therefore going to represent the things we kind of gain as a result of going out and experiencing things. And so what do we get when we experience society? We get belief systems, right? Belief systems, values, and things of that nature are things that tend to be very cultural. They can be very unique to ourselves, but typically speaking, when you go out into society, what do? You share those things. You exchange, right? And belief systems can be as simple as, how to do, farming techniques or building techniques, or it could be more kind of abstract things. It could extend all the way out to things like religion, philosophy, right? How to structure society. So Jupiter is going to represent these core beliefs. When we look at Jupiter in our own chart, it's going to show where we tend to find our belief systems, find our sense of optimism, positivity. Because what is optimism? Optimism is a positive mindset, is a mindset of gain, a mindset of abundance. I am believing that this will happen because when it does happen, I gain from it, right? So it's the mental mindset of gain, not necessarily just the physical gain, right? And so that's why Jupiter has this optimistic quality. So what can be negative then? Because this sounds fantastic, right? Sounds excellent. And it is. This is why Jupiter is considered the greater benefic, is because not only can we see it for the entirety of the night, but it's also something that provides great gains in any atmosphere. Well, the difficulty of Jupiter is excess, right? Too much of something. Because Jupiter adds in any way, shape, or form. It's always adding to everything it touches. So when you have Jupiter in, say, a harsh aspect to something, or even a good aspect to, but maybe to like some negative qualities, you get things done in excess, things done in a way that becomes more harmful, right? If I have this chocolate bar, it's tasty, but if I have too many chocolate bars, right, I'm going to gain weight, might get diabetes, etc. And so this is the difficulty with Jupiter. And it's, like I said, it's a soft difficulty. It's not struggle and turmoil necessarily, but it's excessiveness. It's overindulgence in the things that are pleasurable and good. Now, overindulgence is going to cross over to Venus a little bit. That's something they certainly both tend to do. Venus more on the hedonistic side, Jupiter more from the kind of just mental mindset side. So Jupiter represents things that are positive in nature, which, like I said, represents our optimism, represents our beliefs, because beliefs, they build us. And as we build up our beliefs, they influence us and help us to become better people, at least if we have good belief systems. If we're building on belief systems that are detrimental to ourselves, right, we could be adding to them, but again, that's where the negative side of it comes in. You don't want to be adding to negative things. And so there's a dynamic with Jupiter that it can be very wise, right? Because what happens when you experience the world, experience multitudes of things, expand yourself, you grow. And when you have lots of experiences, you understand what works and what doesn't. And that's the foundation of wisdom. And so this is why Jupiter is going to represent wisdom, because it represents this growth mentality, this ability to go out into the world and experience and see and do lots of things, and particularly amidst society. Because again, society, when you interact with other people, you see other beliefs, you see other cultures, you see other ways of doing things, right? You have interactions with people that will challenge your own beliefs. right? And when you challenge your own beliefs, you're either going to change them or you're going to reinforce them. You're going to understand them even better. And so Jupiter is very social in that way, and that it wants us to go out into society and kind of throw our beliefs out there into the pot so that we can see what functions, what doesn't. Because when we're constantly doing this, we grow. And when we grow, we become better. We become wiser, more capable in whatever aspect of life we're really looking to do. And so that's really the kind of the basis of Jupiter. It's, I would say, pretty straightforward planet. Now, I want to talk about a few misconceptions. Jupiter is not, as I said, it's not always good. You can have with Jupiter an excessiveness, overindulgence, right? Because you're going too much. You're applying too many things. You're adding too often. And so this is the real negative aspect of Jupiter. But as I said, if you can manage that, you mitigate that, right? It provides for tremendous wisdom. This is why these Jupiter-ruled signs, or people with strong Jupiter in their chart, even though they may be excessive in certain ways, they have a tendency to bounce back from that and have a tendency to really be very generous and wise people over the course of time, because they're able to take that extra and really apply it to themselves. Jupiter is best used in our charts when we use it for our own, I would say, growth, and not just applying, because people want to think, oh, I just want the physical benefits from Jupiter. But Jupiter is so much more than that. It's so much more than just our physical abundance, right? It's our mental abundance, our emotional abundance, social abundance, psychological abundance, societal abundance, right? There's so many ways it can be applied, and we want to make sure we keep that in mind and see where we can really truly be abundant and have a sense of optimism that can kind of project us forward in a way that's fruitful. Because being fruitful is something that really is kind of the true result of what Mars is doing, right? Mars wants to go out into the world to acquire, to plant seeds, whatever it's going to do. When you plant seeds, what ends up happening, hopefully, if you water it, you take care of it, they bear fruit. And then you have more than what you started with. And so that's what Jupiter really wants, is to have us be in a place where we can water the plants and grow and bear fruit. We see this especially with Jupiter in its exaltation sign, which I'll discuss in a moment. So to briefly sum up then, because this is a fairly short episode, Jupiter's pretty straightforward in my opinion. It's about positivity, and therefore it's about abundance and growth. And it's about growing in ways which make us better. So I want to make this distinction really fast, because things that make us better aren't always experiences. They're necessarily positive, right? Sometimes we go through very negative experiences, but they make us better because of it, right? It's a learning experience. And so this is why sometimes with Jupiter transits, we don't get suddenly a bunch of good things showered down on us, because Jupiter at the end of the day is about what's going to allow us to grow. And growth oftentimes requires a little bit of challenge. You don't really grow when things are stagnant, right? And so while there is a softness to Jupiter, right, it is going to bring a lot of good things, because it represents abundance, positivity, optimism, addition, right? Expansion. Expansion is another big thing. We see this with the signs that it rules, but Jupiter's always wanting to expand outward. Why? It's a large planet. It's the biggest planet, right? It's trying to expand. And again, it's moving beyond. When you have a kind of open world to explore, what do? You expand out into it to find out all the things that are there. So this expansive quality to Jupiter is what allows us to grow, master, become wise. So what does Jupiter represent then? Rule then, if we look at the signs. Well, Jupiter's going to rule two signs, Pisces and Sagittarius. And if we notice, Pisces and Sagittarius are going to be opposite to the Mercury ruled signs. So it is an interesting thing. I mentioned Jupiter's the largest planet, Mercury's the smallest. In the zodiac, they're actually opposites, right? The intellect that Mercury tends to rule tends to be more our learning process, our detail orientedness, kind of data, facts and figures. Jupiter's sense of knowledge, right, is more wisdom oriented, right? If we're thinking of terms of what Jupiter's doing, it's moving out into the broader world. So it's a broader perspective, right? We have a much broader perspective of things. We're dealing with lots and lots of different cultures, which means we have to keep a broader perspective to see and understand how they all fit together, right? When we move out into the greater world in terms of our career, we see how things fit together more differently than the kind of tight-knit way we went through things in school. So Jupiter has to have this broader perspective as a result of its kind of expansion, abundant nature. So this is why it is always opposite the Mercury-ruled signs, because it has this dynamic. So let's talk about this a little bit more then. So with Sagittarius, you get a mutable fire sign. And that's the other thing. Both the Jupiter-ruled signs are mutable. They're reactive in nature, which makes sense, again, because what do we do with our belief systems? What do we do with our experiences? We have to slowly, there are things we kind of gain from what we're already doing, right? They don't come, we don't kind of formulate them and then go out and, apply them to the world. Some people try to do that. But the reality is most of our belief systems come as a result of what? Us experience something. And then that causes the formulation, the idea, the mental math going on in your head to say, oh, that's interesting. That's how that works. Okay, how can I apply this, right? So there's innately kind of a reactionary nature to our beliefs, to the way we grow, right? You don't just say one day, I'm going to grow, and then you suddenly start growing. No, it comes as a result of doing other things. And again, with retrogrades once a year for an extended duration of time, that means there's going to be a lot of look back, a lot of kind of reassessing. Okay, does this make sense to me? When I'm challenged by something, am I reflecting on it or am I simply ignoring it? Because if we're never reflecting, we're obviously not going to grow from our experiences. So that's a big key component. Jupiter retrograde periods, when they happen, we're in one right now, are excellent times to kind of reflect on the areas of life that Jupiter is in for you, or that Jupiter's transiting, right? To really get a sense of, okay, where am I growing in these areas? What changes can I make? What changes can I envision so that in the future I can continue to grow? So I'm not squandering this time period. All right, so back to the signs. I'm kind of getting on a tangent here. So Jupiter rules two signs, Sagittarius and Pisces. They're both mutable. They're both opposite Mercury signs. In the case of Sagittarius, you have a fire sign. I tend to think of Sagittarius like a wildfire. It wants to expand outward in very kind of volatile chunks. And what Sagittarius has is this quality of wanting to go out and explore the world. Right? That's kind of the main thing. And then once it explores the world, what's the other component of Jupiter? Right? You explore, then you become experienced and you become wiser. And with both of the Jupiterian signs, I should have mentioned this earlier, but Jupiter represents people who teach. Because what is teaching? Teaching is passing on the wisdom that you already have. So it's a form of gaining abundance. So it represents the people that pass on that abundance. In a lot of traditional texts, they'll call it the guru, right? But it's teachers generally. And so Sagittarius is very much this kind of teacher mindset. It wants to go out and explore and experience everything. And then once it's experienced it, it wants to then turn around and teach it. Because it's learned, it's become wise. And so that's why Jupiter rules Sagittarius, because it allows for this tremendous abundance as it kind of chaotically moves about the world, experiencing new things, right, through that fiery experience. Jupiter also rules Pisces. Pisces is immutable water. It is exceptionally mutable, exceptionally changeable. And really, I think of Pisces like the deep ocean. When you think of the ocean, there's, especially once you kind of plunge down into it a little bit, it seems limitless, right? And Pisces is an interesting sign. It's about tremendous depth of thought, understanding, connection, right? It takes the expansive quality of Jupiter and applies it to the kind of intuitive, emotional concept of Pisces and really allows that depth of knowledge and wisdom to kind of radiate outwards in a way that's very loving and kind of serving and unconditionally loving, I should say, towards mankind, right? Towards the collective, towards the group. Pisces is very collective oriented because it wants to take everything and throw it into the whole in a way where it has that broad perspective of the whole. That's why it's so deep. So Jupiter rules Pisces because it allows for that tremendous depth, both in terms of the emotional qualities, but also in terms of the knowledge qualities. Pisces is typically a very, very intelligent sign. Now, in terms of the signs where Jupiter is in detriment, that means it's going to be opposite to Sagittarius and Pisces. We get Gemini and Virgo. And obviously the main quality is going to be both those signs are ruled by Mercury, which means they want to do things according to the details. In Gemini, it's Jupiter's in a place where it's concerned with, right, lots of ideas, lots of thought. But the thing is Jupiter is about wisdom, and wisdom doesn't come from thought. Wisdom comes from experience. And so this is where it tends to struggle in Gemini, is that it has to rely on the experiences of others to gain its wisdom, right? It has to go out and talk to other people, has to share and exchange ideas with other people in order to gain the wisdom that it gets, which is very counter to naturally just going out and having those experiences yourself, right? That's the Sagittarian mindset. And so this is why it's in detriment in Gemini and why it tends to struggle, because you get somebody who's got a lot of ideas, but they're things that are not really, like I said, you can think about all kinds of crazy things, but crazy things don't necessarily work in reality. And that's where experience comes in. The other sign, Virgo is very practical, right? It's pragmatic. It's looking for what works, right? It's detail-oriented in kind of a mastery sense. It really wants to hone in and master its skill in a particular area, whereas Gemini is kind of more broad. But the reason that Jupiter tends to struggle in Virgo, right, why it's in detriment, is, again, it has to do with this idea of it's mastering one little thing, right? And it's paying attention to all the details, and details are hard for Jupiter. Jupiter wants to expand. The other thing is Pisces takes a tremendous view of the whole, has the broad scope of everything where it can just let the details kind of absolve into it so that the details don't matter. But Jupiter in Virgo gets hung up on the details. It's too many details. It's hyper detail oriented, which can lead it to losing sight of the big picture, which is what it's about to begin with. So that's why Jupiter tends to struggle and why it's in detriment in Virgo. Now, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, and it's going to be in fall in Capricorn. Why? Well, Cancer is the sign of growth. It's ruled by the moon. It's about mothering. It's about nurturing things. Cancer wants to grow something. It wants to grow children. It wants to grow its whatever creative thing it's working on. Cancer wants to grow things. And it has a very patient, growth-oriented mindset. And so when you put the planet of abundance in the sign of growth, you get tremendous, abundant growth. This is why Jupiter is fantastic in Cancer. That's why it's exalted there, because it's in a place where it can grow exceptionally well. It can naturally foster through wisdom, through experience, the things that it's trying to raise up and teach. Jupiter is said to represent children. I think it tends to be more in a procreation kind of a way, less of a children themselves kind of a way. And it's because what are children? Children are the fruits of your own, well, I don't want to call it labor, but they're the fruits of your sexual life, right? With a partner, hopefully. Children come from sexual contact, sexual things. And so Jupiter represents that. Now, Jupiter in Cancer allows for tremendous growth. As I said, it can be wise to the things that it's taking charge of, that it's allowing to grow in a way that's very healthy and good. But it's in fall in Capricorn, because in Capricorn's about responsibility. It's a cardinal earth sign. It's ruled by Saturn. We'll talk about Saturn in the next episode. But in Capricorn, Jupiter is in a place where abundance only comes when I build it myself, right? The optimism, the positivity, the expansion only comes when you do it yourself through hard work and responsibility. It's kind of, I don't want to say counter to what Jupiter wants to do, because Jupiter wants to give freely, right? When you go out, you naturally have experiences. But in the case of Jupiter and Capricorn, there's an abundance that kind of only comes, you only get the things when you actually really work hard at it. So it's a feeling of, at least in a birth chart, it's often a feeling of not being allowed to have things unless you do it yourself, right? Nothing good ever comes unless I do it myself. So it can be a very pessimistic kind of attitude sometimes. It can really kind of downplay the natural optimism of Jupiter. But that's not to say you can't be successful. The great benefit to having Jupiter in Capricorn is that it allows for tremendous results, tremendous growth once you put in the diligence and hard work. It's just kind of a double-edged sword there. If you don't put it in, you don't get it. So that's why Jupiter is in fall in Capricorn. So that's everything in regards to Jupiter. Jupiter, again, it represents optimism, abundance, positivity. It's about growth and expanding ourselves, expanding society, expanding whatever it touches, right? In a way that's good, that's healthy, or at least that's the ideal. If it can represent too much excessiveness, too much diligence, too much good things, in a way that becomes unhealthy or detrimental to our own growth, right? We eat too many candy bars, and that's going to block our own ability to grow healthy. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. I am a practicing astrologer, so if you're interested in a reading, you can reach out to me at james@jdastrology.com. And thank you for listening.